An unidentified party has been buying a lot of gold while you were preoccupied with inflation, the war in Ukraine, and the current situation of the global economy. That's right, the price of gold in recent months has risen 25%. Even while supply and demand on the financial markets control the price of gold, most of the gold in our world is bought directly from manufacturers. The US dollar, euros, or any other currency that the vendor is ready to take can be used in such transactions. But now that this enigmatic customer has been identified, China has been identified. Yes, China has acknowledged recently that it has been purchasing gold in large quantities. The Central Bank of China purchased more than 32 tons of gold in November of last year alone, and 30 tons in December. However, these are only publicly available data. There are numerous more black market sources that show China has been purchasing significantly more gold. However, why would China desire to purchase gold? There is an easy solution. China must demolish the dollar if it wants to dominate the world in the 21st century. And in this instance, China intends to provide a currency backed by gold. But this brilliant move contains more than just gold. China has also been forming alliances with nations that are resource-rich. From Saudi Arabia to a new ally, Russia, India, and Brazil. This BRICS bloc announced last year that they want to launch their own currency, a gold-backed currency issued by the world's most resource-rich countries. And if China succeeds in taking the dominant currency position away from the dollar, then the world order will change completely. International financial markets would see movements never seen before, international alliances would change completely, and China would become the new world power. Get ready because 2023 will be a year of historic change. The world saw one of the most significant changes in history during World War II. The most significant sanctions for establishing the global economic system met in 1944 in the northwest of the United States. At this meeting, it was decided that only the dollar would be backed by gold and that all other currencies would be measured against it. As a result, the dollar gained complete control over the global economy, making the United States the world's dominant superpower. However, why did the dollar have such privileges? The reason was very simple. The United States was in possession of most of the gold. It had the most advanced economy in the world. Its military was the strongest in the entire planet. However, former President Nixon shocked the globe 30 years later when he said that the dollar would no longer be backed by gold. They altered the global monetary system because using a currency backed by gold restricted them because they had to store the equivalent amount of gold in their vaults for every dollar they created. As a result, they were unable to simply print money without gold to support it. And as the 1970s began, the US economy was experiencing a number of issues. They had a protracted war in Vietnam, a massive budget deficit, and investors were trading their dollars for gold. The only option left to the United States was to print money in order to cover all those costs and address all those issues. However, they would be unable to do so if gold were not backing the dollar. They could only print more dollars if they had additional gold stored away in their vaults. President Nixon made the decision to stop providing that support at that point, and money was then printed. But this jeopardized the dollar's hegemony. This meant that the dollar was no longer supported by anything and that its hegemony was at jeopardy. The United States made sure that the dollar was backed by oil, an even more significant resource, in order to maintain that hegemony. Middle Eastern nations like Saudi Arabia had become significant oil exporters by the early 1970s. However, the main issue was how unstable and unsafe the area was. As a result, the US offered to provide Saudi Arabia's military in return for Saudi Arabia solely accepting US dollars as payment for its oil. By entering into this agreement, the United States guaranteed that oil would only be purchased or sold using dollars, upholding the dollar's hegemony throughout the world. The world's most valuable natural resource is unquestionably oil. Without oil, we would be unable to manufacture energy, make plastics, or even nourish our soil. We also couldn't transport ourselves. Oil therefore powers the global economy. Additionally, the fact that oil is priced in dollars raises the demand for dollars because Saudi Arabia, the world's largest exporter, will only accept dollars.
Thus, the well-known phrase petrodollar was coined.
Now that the dollar remained the most significant currency in the world, the government of the United States only needed to create more of them to pay wars or cover budget deficits. If you are enjoying this video and want to be aware of new videos, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. To keep the petrodollar, the US was prepared to go to considerable measures. There have been a few significant instances in history where leaders of nations that produce oil attempted to receive money other than the dollar. In most cases, these leaders were imprisoned, punished, or overthrown.
Now let's talk about China. Without a question, China is the world's factory. Everything that you see around you is somehow related to China. Everything from your devices to your clothes to our medicine. Even the cuisine has a connection to China in some way. Even if you believe the food you have at home is unrelated to China, you are mistaken. I can assure you that some Chinese-made equipment was utilized to remove, transport, and package that food.
China uses natural resources voraciously since it is the world's factory. Oil, natural gas, and metals are required by all of the plastic, electronic components, and industries. China has been strengthening its connections with nations in Africa, Latin America, and most significantly Russia during the past few decades. Natural resources are abundant in all of these nations, and China wants them. Unsurprisingly, the United States has neglected several of these nations in recent years. For instance, the United States and Europe have now designated Russia as their top opponent, and they are attempting to impose an embargo to cause its economy to collapse. Even though China is the world's factory and has these relationships with nations with abundant natural resources, the dollar still holds sway over the country. Yes, practically all other natural resources and international trade are priced in dollars as well, as the price of oil is expressed in dollars. And because of the dollar's dominance, the United States may continue to be the world's superpower. For instance, all the United States would need to do to control a nation and acquire all of its natural resources would be to print money to pay for both their military costs and the acquisition of these resources. For instance, the epidemic precisely reflected that. The United States printed an absurd amount of money with little negative effects. Only the nations and investors with dollars as their primary currency, including China, faced the effects. China must therefore eliminate the dollar if it wants to become the dominant power on Earth. And it's nothing new either. According to rumors, China will introduce the renowned digital yuan to fight with the dollar. Now that it has become a reality, the yuan is known as CBDC, or central bank digital currency. And regrettably, it appears that this currency cannot compete with the dollar. Additionally, it has been predicted that the euro will take over as the dominant currency in the globe. Despite numerous attempts, the dollar remains the most significant currency. Here you will see, for example, the reserves of all the governments in the world. As you will see, the dollar is by far the most important currency, followed by the euro. However, recent events have undergone an unanticipated change. Remember when Saudi Arabia could only accept dollars as payment for their oil? That, however, has just changed. Beginning in 2023, Saudi Arabia declared that it would no longer only get dollars when selling its oil. It was widely reported last year that this would happen, but it has now actually happened. The news, though, is more extensive. Saudi Arabia has become warmer with China recently than it has ever been, and it has even expressed a desire to join the BRICS alliance, which consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Saudi Arabia is now rejecting America and displaying more commitment to its new allies. Additionally, as a result of the conflict in Ukraine, Russia has the most international sanctions at the moment. Russian citizens living in the US and Europe have had more than $300,000 taken from them, commodities from Russia cannot be purchased or exported, and Russia has run out of Western allies. In addition, despite the sanctions' negative effects on the Russian economy, Russia has continued to support its global allies and purchase large amounts of gold. Yes, as was mentioned at the start of this video, China and Russia have been purchasing a significant amount of gold. This is a story that received little media attention, and that was done on purpose. The most that these nations can hope for is to carry out their strategy secretly. Additionally, it was unclear precisely who was purchasing such significant quantities of gold on the open markets, but we now know it was China and Russia.
In the last 10 years, China and Russia have become the world's largest gold producers. About 15% of all the gold in the world has been mined by Chinese companies in Latin America and Africa.
And as you might expect, the Chinese government controls these businesses. In addition, Russia takes the second place with about 10% of all the gold in the world. So, even though it is now known that China and Russia have been purchasing gold on open markets, it is unknown exactly how much gold is in their possession. Here in this chart you will see which governments have the most gold in the world. As you will see, neither China nor Russia are in the number one position, but rather the United States and its Western allies. China and Russia are only listed after the Western powers. But this is no coincidence.
The last thing you are going to do is make a public announcement that you are going to introduce a new gold-backed currency. You are probably starting to understand what is happening at this point.
Due to its solely gold-backed currency during World War II, the United States rose to global dominance. This support came to an end in 1971, but by teaming up with Saudi Arabia, it became the petrodollar. Since ending the deal, Saudi Arabia is now able to accept payments in any currency, not just dollars. No one has paid any attention to the fact that China and Russia have been mining and acquiring a significant portion of the world's gold supply while all of this is happening. However, by the same token, nobody has ever informed you that the dollar is also a significant con. Yes, as I have told you, the United States has access to the most potent printer in the entire planet. They only need to print money if they want to pay for a war, a coup, cover deficits, or keep the world's most powerful military in place. Only governments and those who possess dollars are affected by the effects of such printing. In this graph you will see how the dollar has lost purchasing power over the last century thanks to dollar printing. In other words, the dollar used to buy you a lot more things, while today a dollar buys you less than 5% of what it bought you 100 years ago. However, they don't tell you that outright since it doesn't work for the American government. The American government wants us to all continue funding them in dollars. The biggest investor nations in the world are aware of this, which is why they no longer want to participate in the game. But the main issue is that there hasn't been a strong currency to replace the dollar. For instance, the euro is constantly printed by the EU government and is also an unbacked currency. The Chinese yuan is also a poor substitute. Why is it not a better option? To begin with, China has two different currencies, the CNY and the CNH. While the CNY is a currency that can only be used in China and is governed by the government, the CNH is the Chinese yuan that any of us can purchase. You are not allowed to leave the country with this kind of yuan. The Chinese yuan is not a good option since there is no mistrust and there is no complexity. These are not good alternatives, even without cryptocurrency, as no significant government uses them for trade. However, everything is about to change. The BRICS bloc nations declared their intention to introduce their own currency in 2022. No one made much of this news since, according to this chart, the BRICS countries don't even command 10% of all those global reserves. But the BRICS nations would need to provide something that the dollar does not, which is where gold comes in order to outperform the dollar and draw users of this new currency.
Government deficits and excessive inflation are major issues in many BRICS nations.
These issues are instantly resolved by a currency backed by gold since there can only be as much money as there is gold in these nations' vaults. Additionally, from oil to the precious metals required in batteries, the BRICS nations completely control all natural resources. No one could stop the BRICS from demanding that a certain currency be used to pay for these resources if they so desired. And finally, the BRICS nations account for more than 40% of the global population, making them the ideal market for spreading the word about this new currency. Therefore, it should not come as a surprise to you that all of these nations are involved in the production and purchase of gold. To checkmate the United States, do these chess moves. The entire course of events will shift if this happens. For the first time in many years, the nations in charge of the world's natural resources would develop a currency that is backed by gold. But, do you trust these countries enough to use this new currency, or would you prefer to continue using the dollar? Leave us your opinion in the comments. Thanks for watching The Money Street, and don't forget to click the subscribe button for more financial videos.